Good morning, welcome to the Morning Momentum this beautiful Friday. As we get into the weekend, let's take a look at what we are waking up to this Friday morning. But before we roll, this is a daily compendium of local and international news, human interest stories, current affairs, and expert opinion. Let's take a look at the standard. The elephant in the room, Ruto Raila caught in succession fight. Now, stormy waters. President and ODM leader have been forced to wade into supremacy battles on who wears regional shoes, and the fights are getting ugly. That story is beefed up for you on page 6 of the Standard this morning. Also, Koskei to civil servants. Stop deals, go on leave. Head of Public Service Felix Koskei says some public servants are deliberately not going on leave to maintain their corruption networks in government. That story is beefed up for you on page 8. Not our ports. Coast leaders warn Ruto. That story is beefed up for you on page 7. Also inside, country ill, prepared for flooding disaster. With El Nino rains looming, a report by the Auditor General shows the disaster response system is fraught with inadequacies. That story is beefed up for you on page 4 of the Standard this morning. Let's take a look at page 2. Calls for reforms as Kenya marks 10 years since Westgate attack. Plans are underway to integrate guards into the national security infrastructure. The move is aimed at enhancing intelligence gathering and help in fighting terrorism. That story is beefed up for you on page 2. In numbers, 67 people died after 4 masked gunmen attacked the mall. Approximately 200 people were wounded in the attack. Moving on to page 3. Defiant Oroba calls for probe into what led to her suspension. Oroba laments that the motion was tabled, yet she was not in parliament to defend herself. She was accused of making claims of sexual demand by some parliamentary officials. That story is beefed up for you on page 3 of the Standard this morning. On page 4, despite extension, few students seeking loans, only 23,113 more students in universities and technical colleges have applied in past 2 weeks. Monari suspects some able students could have opted to pay their tuition fees. That story is also beefed up for you on page 4. CSR, KQ donates aeroplane to Mangu High School to support aviation studies. Some good news on page 4. Let's move on to page 6. Now, in fighting jolts Ruto and Raila political paradise amid succession, leaders scheme to take over as Rift Valley kingpin. Raila's succession debate causes unease in Nyanza. That story is also beefed up for you on page 6 of the Standard this morning. On page 7, storm over plan to privatize ports facilities. Now, KPA has placed an international tender for the operation of key port facilities. Coast leaders say there has been no public participation occurrence from locals. That story is beefed up for you on page 7 of the Standard this morning. Moving on swiftly to page 8, go on leave. Public staff told in bid to fight graft. Head of civil service say all officers should take their leave days every year. He noted that rogue staff hide behind the excuse of huge workload and shortage of qualified staff. That story is beefed up for you on page 8. Let's move on to page 10. Clerics tell state to step up efforts to restore peace in the North Rift. Leaders say underlying causes of conflict remain largely unresolved. The conflicts have been linked to scramble for natural resources. That story is beefed up for you on page 10 of the Standard this morning. Let's take a look at page 12. Big setback for Mau Mau veterans in land petition. Judge rules that the petitioners had not demonstrated how respondents have violated the law. Respondents include managers of large farms, AFC, NLC, and the Attorney General. That story is beefed up for you on page 12. On page 12 still, development. Boost for Siaya as state to build 500 million park. More than 20,000 traders in Siaya County will benefit from a 500 million aggregation and industrial park to be constructed in Got Akara, Alego Usonga constituency. That story is beefed up for you on page 12. Let's move on to page 14. Audit exposes government's weak preparations to respond to floods. Report shows disasters response is marred by inadequacies and inefficiencies. Now, administrators discussed how to distribute relief food and not handle flood waters. That story is beefed up for you on page 14. Let's take a look at the expert opinion inside the Standard this morning. Kuria's well-oiled diatribe secures his place as Kenya Kwanza's moral compass. This is a story you want to catch up with on page 15 of the Standard this morning. Let's take a look at page 17. Should the government introduce a subsidized fuel? Now, there are sentiments by Kenyans. Faith Mwangi says, yes, we will have massive job losses. On the contrary, Henry Carlos says no, subsidies won't end our problems. That story is beefed up for you on page 17. For the Pulse lovers, the article is also beefed for you inside the Standard this morning. Let's take a look at county news. This morning, Wamatangi launches project to improve Kiambu ECDE facilities. Under the plan, 130 identical centers are set to be completed in December. To improve enrollment, pupils get free porridge daily and 3 eggs a week. That story is beefed up for you on page 20. In Nandi County, tea farmers expect high yields thanks to rains and fertilizer. Tea farmers in Nandi County are hopeful that the projected El Nino rains will boost their yields. That story is beefed up for you on page 20. Moving on to page 21, how Assembly blew 91.43 million in dubious payments, report shows. Committee says the money was spent on purported travel and sitting allowances. Documents provided for scrutiny, such as the local purchase order, lacked ownership. That story is beefed up for you on page 21. In a nutshell, in Nairobi, workers block graveyards in payroll. That's a story from Langata Cemetery in Migori County. Ayako issues ultimatum to ministers. In Nakuru County, MCAs investigate ECD land dispute. In Machakos, Wavinya shakes up her cabinet. Governor Wavinya Ndeti has made changes in her cabinet. Those stories are beefed up for you on page 21. Let's shift gears to business news inside the Standard this morning. Kenyan exports to Netherlands double on stronger trade ties. Now, the country is now the second largest destination of Kenyan goods in the world and the largest in Europe, with exports doubling to 70 billion shillings in the last decade. Envoy challenges Nairobi to improve the logistics sector through the digitization. You can catch up with that story on page 22. Let's take a look at international news this morning. Africa G20 membership will give the AU more say on global issues. The G20 was established after the 1999 Asian financial crisis as an informal grouping of ministers of finance and central bank governors. It grew out of the G7, which was formed in 1975 to deal with another complex global financial and economic crisis. That story is beefed up for you on page 24 of the Standard this morning. Let's take a look at page 27, water hygiene and sanitation article. The Sundams changing lives in Makueni. APA Insurance founded the dams at a cost of 5 million per dam. The company engages the local community when building the dams. You can catch up with that story on page 27 and 28 of the Standard this morning. Let's take a look at sports news. Now, the top story here, tricky Tonga test is true start to Scotland's World Cup campaign. Time for the real Tonga to show up, says Star Center Fekitoa. The Scots had a week off after that opening round loss. That story is beefed up for you on page 32. F1, Hamilton expects Red Bull to be back. Lewis Hamilton will be convinced some things up if Red Bull are not back at their normal level at this weekend's Japanese Grand Prix. That story is beefed up for you on page 32. Let's move on to page 34. Kiambu gears up for bumper entry at Kiambu Invitational Gala. Swimmers are leaving nothing to chances as they prepare for the Kiambu Invitational Swimming Gala that begins tomorrow to Sunday at the M-Pesa Foundation Academy in Thika. Also, another top story, get ready for Battle Royal as road running season begins. On Sunday, the world will remain glued to 49th Berlin Marathon Showdown. In less than 10 days, Riga will host the inaugural World Athletics Road Running Championships. That story is beefed up for you on page 34. On page 35, Odemba issues Harambee Starlets rallying cry ahead of Cameroon duel. Head coach confident Starlets are ready for tonight's match. Akida Dogo and Shikangwa to lead Kenya's attack in Douala. That story is beefed up for you on page 35. On the cover page, Onana takes blame for Manchester United loss at Bayern. Red Devils suffered a 4-3 defeat in their Champions League match on Wednesday. The goalkeeper blames himself for gifting Bayern the opener. That story is beefed up for you on page 36. Arsenal return to Champions League in style. Arsenal were desperate to make up for 6 years of lost time in the Champions League and made PSV pay heavily for the pain of those days in the wilderness on a rain-soaked Wednesday night at Emirates Stadium. That story is beefed up for you on the cover page of the Standard this morning. With that story of Arsenal, we take a quick break and then we come back with the top stories making the headlines inside the Daily Nation. Use the hashtag The Morning Momentum to interact with us. You can also send in your sentiments via our SMS line 0719 144 144.
Yeah, yeah. Tupo side, kata simu manze. This is Rising Star, the best show in East and Central Africa, au sio manze? So leo manze tuko hapa Nairo, au sio? I go by the name Alex, or you can call me the guy. So sisi kama Rising Star manze tumekuja na vitu mzuri. Hii mwaka tumeamua tunapiga shughuli safi vile mnataka, hivyo ndio tunapiga hii show, au sio? So kwa Rising Star tutakuwa na segment zingine hatari. Kitu ya kwanza tutakuwa na tea. Tukimalizia show yetu manze tutakuwa tunawaletea tea, what is trending. And then also pale tutakuwa na games. Unajua nini na games manze? So guest wetu akikam through tutakuwa tunacheza game, alafu pia tutakuwa na ile segment pia ya maswali ya kujua wasanii wetu wametoka wapi, challenges zenye wamekuwa wakipitia, au sio? Yes. Bila kumalizia manze, tunasemaga mnaweza tupata pale YouTube at Younib MEDIA TV, au sio? Yes. So bila kupoteza wakati manze, thank you so much, we love you so much. Continue watching Younib TV, and this is Rising Star. Kaboom. That's it.
to the morning momentum. If you are just joining us, you are still rolling with the host with the most. Alfonsoh is my name. Use the hashtag the morning momentum if you want to be part of the conversation via our socials at Younib_TV on Instagram, Younib Media TV on Facebook and YouTube. You can as well follow me at my personal handles, Alfonsoh Albakwekwe on Facebook and _Albakwekwe on Instagram. Let's now take a look at the top stories inside the Daily Nation this morning. Talks team in near fisticuffs. The ongoing negotiations between President William Ruto and opposition leader Raila Odinga to resolve the 2022 post-election crisis yesterday degenerated into a shouting match which almost broke into a fist fight amid a major split between the warring camps. That story is beefed up for you on page 4 of the Daily Nation this morning. Questions over new ports lease. That story is also beefed up for you on page 6. In other news, TSC rejects proposals on education reforms. Teachers Service Commission boss Nancy Macharia tells MPs their views to the Presidential Working Party on education reforms were neither considered nor acknowledged in the final report. That story is beefed up for you on the cover page. In other news as well, why NHIF workers may have to reapply for jobs. Employees of NHIF will have to reapply for jobs and be recruited on merit to serve the new fund that will phase out the 57-year-old state corporation. That story is beefed up for you on page 7. In other news, Westgate Mall marks 10th anniversary of terrorist attack. That story is beefed up for you on page 12. Let's take a look at the stories inside the Daily Nation. Quote of the day: I am a member of ODM and that is the party I will use to vie for my second term unless they want to lose this seat. That is Felix Odiwuor Langata MP. Also, KMTC turns away unqualified students after placement error. College officials say they are working to resolve the matter. Placement to the college was done by CUSPs. And you want to catch up with that story on page 2 of the Daily Nation this morning. Let's take a look at page 3. Woman suspected of killing 3 stepchildren in house fire. Police say a manhunt has been launched for a woman who's believed to have fled to Uganda. The children's father was at his other home when he got the news. That story is beefed up for you on page 3 of the Daily Nation this morning. On page 4, talks teeter on edge as bickering among rivals deepens crisis. Mr. Odinga's team only succeeded in his demands to have the security details of Azimio leaders restored. Hassan Omar berates Jeremiah Kioni over his talk of dialogue failing. That story is beefed up for you on page 4. On page 5, survey, UDA remains most popular party. Both Kenya Kwanza Alliance and Azimio la Umoja One Kenya Alliance have lost support in the last 3 months. In numbers, 35%. TIFA survey shows that the UDA party enjoys 35% support among Kenyans. ODM party, on the contrary, enjoys 16%. That story is beefed up for you on page 5. On page 6, lower threshold for port investors raises queries. Kenya Kwanza leaders had last year opposed port privatization plans. That story is beefed up for you on page 6. On page 7, NHIF employees to apply for jobs in new authority. Folding NHIF is part of the state's universal health coverage plan. Fund's staff have been accused of engaging in corruption by members and state officials. That story is beefed up for you on page 7 of the Daily Nation this morning. On page 8, court puts Waititu and his wife on their defense in Rhodes tender case. Magistrate says the prosecution directly implicated Mr. Waititu, his wife, and companies in the case. The former Kiambu governor had claimed that the case was politically motivated. That story is beefed up for you on page 8. Let's move on to page 10. World leaders urged to use COVID lessons to prepare for the future. The Pandemic Fund has already approved grants allocation to 37 countries in 6 world regions. Delegates condemn discrimination during COVID-19 pandemic. That story is beefed up for you on page 10. Let's move on to some other news on page 12. How terror attack changed security setup at Westgate. Most malls around Nairobi have enhanced their security protocols. Israel-based firm was brought on board when the mall reopened in 2015, replacing a local security firm that was in charge at the time of attack. That story is beefed up for you on page 12 of the Daily Nation this morning. Let's take a look at page 14. Coffee buyers give auction wide berth as Gachagua reforms bite. The Nairobi Coffee Exchange says this has lessened competition, driving down prices of the cherries. About 80% of Kenya's coffee has traded through the auction. That story is beefed up for you on page 14 of the Daily Nation this morning. Let's take a look at some expert opinion inside the Daily Nation. Quality standards are the cornerstone of resilience. Standards are vital in building confidence towards an inclusive, sustainable, resilient, and digitally empowered future. Those are sentiments by Murira Karau. That story is beefed up for you on page 17. Give Sakaja food plan time. What matters is that the pupils are fed. Those are sentiments by Sharon Namarome. That story is beefed up for you on page 17. Moving on to page 19. Why top unionists at Tuoli accused senior NMG editors for blackmail. The death headline can only be justified if it's meant to be hyperbole and readers understand it to be so. That is a story you want to catch up with on page 19. Let's move on. The DN2 article today, it's all about The Voice. Dorcas Rigathi on why she champions for boy-child empowerment. You want to catch up with that story inside the DN2 article. Let's move on to county news inside the Daily Nation this morning. CRA in bid to help counties tap riches in blue economy. The initiative will be rolled out in other counties, CRA says. In Kisii County, I am not going to behave, Arati tells Gachagua. That is a story you want to catch up with on page 21 of the Daily Nation this morning. Moving on to page 22, in Uasin Gishu County, MPs approve application to elevate Eldoret town to 5th city. That story is beefed up for you on page 22. In Meru County, Kavira staring at fresh ouster bid amid fallout. County boss has remained defiant in the face of a sustained onslaught. UDA officials who backed governor in the first impeachment motion reportedly want her out. That story is beefed up for you on page 22. Let's shift gears to international news. Sudan war could engulf region, United Nations official says. The war has claimed the lives of more than 5,000 people, according to United Nations. Catastrophe, places of worship, hospitals, and key infrastructure targeted by fighters. That story is beefed up for you on page 24. DR Congo calls for withdrawal of UN soldiers. That story is also beefed up for you on page 24. Let's move on to page 25. 4 indictments later, and Trump still the man to beat. Supporters remain convinced that he is being persecuted. Donald Trump occupied the Oval Office from 2017 to January 2021. That story is beefed up for you on page 25 of the Daily Nation this morning. Let's take a look at business news. Importers get longer free storage window in Mombasa. That story is beefed up for you on page 26 of the Daily Nation this morning. Let's move on to sports news inside the Daily Nation now, and we start with football. Starlets confront Lioness in Douala. Coach Odemba's squad plays home team Cameroon in crucial match from 9 p.m. Kenya look to punch above their weight. That story is beefed up for you on page 35 of the Daily Nation this morning. On page 36, Vet Labs monthly mag courtesy of fabled Carano. Equity Tony at Ruiru attracts 236 players. KCB series at Kitale this weekend. That story is beefed up for you on page 36. Let's move on to page 38. Kane justifies 15.9 billion price tag. England striker shows his worth in early days with Bayern, but the club is still far from being a finished article. That story is beefed up for you on page 38. On page 39, unique Kipchoge Berlin street artwork unveiled. The street art illustrates Kenyan world record holder in full stride. That story is beefed up for you on page 39. Indeed, he is a legend. Let's take a look at the cover page of the Daily Nation. TSC rejects proposals on education reforms. TSC boss claims their views to the task force were neither considered nor acknowledged in the final report. Ms. Macharia said the PWPER report puts TSC at odds with the Ministry of Education. In other news, UK-Kenya sign High Grand Falls Dam agreement. Plans to build the multi-billion shilling High Grand Falls Dam, a flagship project conceived 10 years ago, have kicked off in earnest after the government formally signed the first agreement with a British construction firm which won the contract. That story is beefed up for you on the cover page. Now, with that story of TSC, we come to the conclusion of today's session of the Morning Momentum. I have been your host, Alfonsoh. Many thanks for choosing to stay with Younib TV, and in a special way, I want to extend my gratitude to all those who made this broadcast a success. Raphael Wangilar behind the camera and the chief controller, Anifa Kavira. See you next week, same time, same place. Until then, do have a beautiful weekend. Bye-bye.
Succesion.